Hi guys, Coach Victor Obledo here today, and today I'm going to follow up on a video that I recently did, how the liver and your emotions were making you sick. And I wanted to follow up because I had some people ask me how it was more related to hormone production and a little more details associated with your gut health. But before we get into that, please like and subscribe and send this out to the YouTube world. And again, if you have any questions or comments, I got an email down there, and please leave them in the comments. We're at a point where we really need to take ownership of our health back, and it starts with having an understanding. So a real quick review: the last video was about the connection between the hypothalamus and our liver, and I try not to make these be too sciencey, but you got to know a little bit of it so that you see that light bulb goes off. The hypothalamus is the brain part of the brain where we feel all of our emotions. Okay, hypothalamus is where we feel all those emotions. It is connected to the liver via the vagus nerve. And so everything you feel is transferred to the liver, whether you're happy or sad. Now, what are we really talking about right now? We're talking about that sadness, anxiety, depression. That's where it becomes a massive problem. If you're happy, guess what? The liver has less load. Yes, we have external sources like stress, xenoestrogens. These are all things that we'll get into a little bit later in the video that are impacting it. But one of the biggest things is that mental awareness. So like I talked in the last video, we're going to talk about this video, gut health and hormones, how it's all related. But a quick review is, in Eastern medicine, the liver is the heart of emotion. And so it kind of gives you an idea of how this is connected right now. And in the last video, I talked about the gut health sadness trap. Because it works on a cycle, there is a tendency to get first mentally upset for prolonged periods of time, but then eventually the liver starts talking back to the brain because everything is in dis-ease, and it starts controlling of your emotional state. Now that's really, really powerful, because you can get so in the hole or underwater, however you want to see it, that eventually it's a self-perpetuating problem. So let's talk a little bit more about this. Let's first talk about cortisol. So I kept this drawing up because it's simple, but cortisol is put out by your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands are two small glands that sit on top of your kidneys. Now, they put off a lot of excitatory hormones like adrenaline, but they also put off cortisol, which is a stress hormone. In low amounts, it's absolutely essential. You're being chased by the bear, you want to mobilize blood sugar, right? But for prolonged periods of time can start to impact how your GI system, and in turn impact the load on the liver. And we just talked about that cycle and how it can affect your brain. So when cortisol goes up, the first thing you need to know is, my guys and my gals, is as cortisol goes up, testosterone goes low. So it's very difficult for those to occur at the same time. As cortisol goes up, it blocks progesterone. For women, this is a viable and most important hormone with what? With having babies, with having a normal cycle. And we'll get into that as we move along. So cortisol up has a problem. Now, how does cortisol in fact affect the gut health? And it affects the gut health in a permeability issue, because it impacts how you digest food. If you're running away from a saber-toothed cat, cortisol put out, you're not really digesting food all that well. And it makes sense in the short term. But in the long term, we're in a position where we're handling stresses, we're emotional stresses, we're putting bad foods in our body. We are putting ourselves in that state all day, every day. And if we do that, it affects the permeability of your intestines, your gut lining, and all of a sudden, you're getting food particles from in the intestines traveling into the bloodstream, which in turn end up in the liver, in turn end up in all your tissues. And so the body has to mobilize as an autoimmune response, because poop's not supposed to be in the blood, or whatever decayed particles, I guess that would be the more appropriate way to do it, get into the blood. They got to mobilize, and it creates an autoimmune response. And guess what? Cortisol goes up even more, and that has already had an impact on the liver, which we know can impact the brain. And so we end up with that cycle. So permeability. So we know that the liver emotional control cycle is something that we can get into right now. And we talked a little bit about that impact, right? And as we get this loop going, you're sad, you've got the little sad face, it affects the liver, and that changes how its 500 functions that it's doing. And it changes, one of its big jobs is to process hormones. And if you're a female, it processes estrogen, right? Now, we know it creates a loop. So it gets bad enough, your enzymes go up, you're having issues, it starts sending a message to basically keep you grumpy all the time, and your GI starts going sideways, right? It gets worse and worse and worse. And now we're in a chronic state of dehydration and constipation in our society right now because of bad food, stress, emotional trauma, whatever you want to call it. And that's leading to more problems because a lot of what the liver does is process estrogen. So this is obviously focused a lot more on not only men, but women. Men do have an estrogen testosterone balance. And so whenever you think estrogens, and my guys would be like, that should be a big light bulb. But for women, oftentimes, well, I'm a female, I'm supposed to have estrogen. But if you can't process estrogen, you become estrogen dominant. And that affects the relationship to progesterone. Because the liver is under too much load, or it's toxic, or whatever you want, it's not feeling good, it cannot get rid of that and create that balance. And so that impacts how you are, your progesterone. So that can lead to traditional symptoms, which most women will get before their period because of that estrogen. Now, what are some of the simple steps that we can talk about to decrease those? There are some simple things that you can do. Obviously, you want to get rid of estrogenic foods, like stuff that's not sourced really, really well is going to have an impact. But I want to be able to round it out. Going back to this, you're getting estrogen dominance. If your bowels are not moving well, you don't have enough fiber in your diet, all of which you can impact. When it gets down into the bowels, that estrogen is being re-released back into the system and comes back to your liver. Because your liver is overloaded, it can't get it out. And guess what? It's having an impact there. And then here we go on the cycle. So we know that stress is impacting it, both present and past, right? We know that xenoestrogens, there are actually 80,000 chemicals on the market right now that haven't been adequately tested to know how it's going to impact our estrogens. Big one, alcohol, right? So if you're having trouble with your hormones, you really got to get rid of alcohol. So it's simple: bump your fiber, decrease your alcohol, break down xenoestrogens, which you can actually find. You can simply Google it and you'll find that information. Things that will cleanse your liver to decrease that are dandelion tea, avocado, turmeric, right? So these are all very simple steps. However, the bigger thing that I always like to point to is get your head in the game. And so mindfulness, sitting and meditating, breathing, journaling, these are all things you cannot discount because you could easily impact that. So if this is really upset, it's trying to send a message over there, but you're sitting and calming yourself down, deconstructing your programming, offloading issues with trauma, you are going to make your liver happy and function well. For me and my clients, I tend to put them on a water fast, 2-3 days of water fast to really allow the body to detoxify and heal. Don't do that without professional help, guys, because there are obviously risks if you're just drinking water. Obviously, if you're driving a car and you're passing out, that's not good. If you have any questions about that, you can leave them in the comments below, or you can honestly Google the matter as well, and that will help you, give you some direction. And then once you get to that, that's where you go into an anti-inflammatory diet. It's very simple to know which foods people tended to react to. One of the easiest things to do is obviously you cut your sugar and your caffeine after you've done this. Remember, stimulants are going to grow bad dysbiosis, and this is the last element, right? So if let's say this is okay, but your gut starts having a problem because you're giving it just crud. Eventually the body has to put out more cortisol. It's processed foods, it's not being absorbed right, and it starts talking to the liver and having that negative feedback loop. So meditation and breath work, good workouts to move, and get some help with coaching, cleanse the food. And then slowly after you've been on an anti-inflammation diet, you can reintroduce other foods. you should be on a whole foods diet and not eat processed foods anyway. If you still don't know that that's related, go do a little research yourself. That information is all out there. Anything that's not sourced well, particularly from meats, is going to bump your estrogen. And with your guy or gal, we don't want that. So the secret here is to address the liver. I hope that's clear, guys. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.